Why is the U.S. military recruiting collapsing? Whom shall I send and who will go for us? Let's go bold.
This is the Go Bold Podcast, a deep dive into God's Word with Scott Patton, where disciples of Jesus witness the Bible come alive and we give Satan no quarter.
Like the king of beers, the U.S. military is finding out what happens when you pay homage to the newest cultural diversity, equity, and inclusion stunts. While the middle class revolt against Bud Light's decision to sponsor trans activist Dylan Mulvaney is growing and growing by the day, it's really not surprising. But here's what's fascinating, and here's what's a sad reality that we face today. The Biden administration is seeing similar revolts in the military recruiting across all branches of services right now. And the question we've got to ask ourselves today is why is recruiting collapsing? And the second question that we must ask ourselves is are Bible believing Christians still wanted in the ranks? We have to ask that question. America faces today one of the greatest military recruiting challenges in recent history, folks. And here's what I'm going to tell you guys we cannot take this lightly. Guys, I'm going to tell you this can be potentially disastrous for the United States. But before we get into the reasons why I think our recruiting is collapsing, let's start with this biblical premise and this beautiful verse. Who will go for us? You know, in the book of Isaiah tells a story of, and the prophet Isaiah tells a story of when God gave his prophet a vision. And he saw that the Israeli nation needed God and he needed a bold volunteer to go out there and talk some hard truths to the nation of Israel. And the Lord wanted a servant to go minister to his people. Isaiah volunteered to be that servant. He did not really discuss his call with God. When God just gave him that vision, he went and he served. And you saw, many times in the Bible when prophets would do this, they would kind of negotiate this with God, but Isaiah never hesitated. You saw this with Moses in Exodus, and you also saw it with Jeremiah. But Isaiah accepted the appointment, accepted the call, made himself available to volunteer. Now, I want you to look at here in verses Isaiah chapter 6, where we're going to read God's word today. And we're going to be in chapter 6, verse 8. And I also heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? This is my favorite part. Then I said, here I am. Send me. If you've been in the military for a few days, I know you came across that verse. Military units have used this part of scripture in Isaiah for a number of years. It's a beautiful, beautiful verse. But the question becomes today, folks, is why is recruiting collapsing? And before we get into the biblical question about Christianity, I want to look at some things today on some serious reasons why it's collapsing, guys, because I kid you not, this is a gigantic strategic problem for America. But let's start with what it's not. Now, um, according to Politico, some distinguished members of the Department of Defense have been blaming the recruiting woes on Tucker Carlson. I'm going to tell you guys that is a bunch of absolute nonsense. And when Politico talks about unnamed sources in DOD, they complain that we're a better country now for bagging because Tucker Carlson was bagging our military every night in front of hundreds of thousands of people, said one DO official who remains anonymous, like all the other ones. They interviewed another one to discuss the story, and he wanted to be anonymous too because this is a political sensitive topic. Good riddance, said the second DOD official. We are pleased with his departure from Fox. Now, here's what I want you to understand, folks. Um, there has always been a tension between news media personalities and the military. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. We didn't see this in the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War. You had a onslaught from the New York Times to MSNBC to numerous uh, political and reporters and commentators that just trash the military all the time. But here's the thing: Tucker Carlson would ask some hard questions about the Pentagon leadership. Okay, and yeah, he had the ear of the DoD officials and of course the Biden administrations, and yeah, he understood that what was happening to the U.S. military, and he asked some very hard questions. He saw the the things that the forcing trans ideology down the throats of sailors and Marine. He also called out the illegal use of the Hyde Amendment, where or not adhering to the Hyde Amendment, where you saw the things with abortion. Okay, he also called out the Biden administration's feckless foreign policy, and that's nothing new. Okay, from and you guys, you've seen this, the countless attacks we've had on Iran. I saw a testimony the other day with Senator Cotton and Secretary of Defense Austin, where Iran has actually attacked us 80. I want to say the number is 80 or 73 times. Okay, since Biden has taken office, and we've only responded 4 times. Okay, you're seeing this, and you saw this with the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. You've seen how China is just moving at will. They flew a balloon all the way across the United States. Did this for 3 or 4 days. We kept saying it was UFOs when everybody knew it wasn't. It was the Chinese. We knew it was Chinese, and finally they shot it down after they collected a bunch of intel on us. We're seeing things with Russia that we could not believe, and you're seeing this across all fronts in the foreign policy. And I'll just tell you, folks, from a national security perspective, my view is simply this: the Biden administration's lack of strategic sophistication is just off the charts here. Now, but here's what I want you to understand. Biden's push to normalize trans ideology on the force is having disastrous consequences in recruiting. I think they all know this, but I think a lot of people in the ranks are just afraid to say it. In essence, what's happening, the Biden administration is budlighting the U.S. military. And I say that term because you saw what Bud Light did to all of their customers when they sponsored Dylan Mulvaney, the transgender on the beer cans and what have you. Okay, now here's what's happening. Here's what's happening. Um, a lot of families are seeing this. A lot of pastors are seeing this. A lot of coaches are seeing this. And I'm just going to tell you guys, a lot of young men and women are seeing this. And Bible believing Christians or conservative Americans that don't are perceiving right now, I'm just going to tell you, and you may not be able to find a survey on this right now because they probably don't want you to see it. The perception is that they're not welcome in the U.S. military. And here's what's even more disturbing, folks, is the fact that the trust in the military, which has been the highest organization in U.S. history for the last 40 to 50 years, has been over the top. Okay. Now, a survey recently, I think this from April, reported from the Hill that trust in the military has dropped from 70% in 2018, fast forward 4 years, to 48% today. The question becomes why. Well, I'm going to tell you what my opinion is, and it has to do with 3 words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, folks, we're not talking about race here. We're talking about the inclusion and the equity and the diversity of having the drag queens and the transgenders, soldiers, sailors, airmen are forcing those in their ranks and forcing those as a part of policy. And I'll just tell you, folks, it's unsettling to a lot of the people that have been coming into the military for a lot of years. Now, under the auspice, they're doing this under the auspice of DIE, which is diversity, equity, inclusion. And you're seeing this in corporate America. You saw this with Bud Light. You're seeing this across the board, and this is what you saw really when you first saw it was with the NFL and with um, you saw it a lot of the big corporations where they're forcing this trans ideology down people's throat, and you're not. and people don't want to see it. And I think that Bud Light was just a tip of the iceberg, but you're seeing it now in the U.S. military, where they're forced to accept this trans ideology at work and in the barracks, and you're seeing it DoD schools and housing. Now, here's what's so disturbing. This is a video I'm fixing to show you from. This is an official Navy video of a trans sailor that was made by the Department of the Navy. So this is not the guy's TikTok account, okay, or his personal social media page. This is a recruiting strategy by the U.S. Navy to go out and get recruits, and they're going to do this via this drag queen sailor. Watch this. Now, like I said, folks, this is not some sailor's TikTok account. This is an official Navy recruiting video. So we have men and women's barracks, we have women and men's barracks, and we have this DIE training that they're forcing the military members to do. And I'm not talking about, folks, there's a lot of Christians that even though they don't accept that lifestyle, they're not telling you that it's not warranted. They can still have their life in America. But when you force it on people who don't want it, that's where it's the problem. Okay? And the DIA training tells the military members, if you disagree with this, or if this is against your biblical beliefs, and just go read Romans chapter 1, you could read Genesis 2, you could read Matthew 5, you could read Genesis 5, and you could see why this would be against a Bible-believing Christian's fundamental truths. But if you have these thoughts that this is not right for me and my family, and I don't really want to serve here, okay, this is the DIE training is going to tell you that you're a racist, you're homophobic, you're a white supremacist, you're a Christian nationalist, and all the litany of things that they're going to be called, and plus the soldiers and sailors, airmen, marine in there are worried, and they're not going to say anything, okay. But here's the thing. The outside of the U.S. military, everybody is seeing this. You're seeing this with that Admiral Rachel Levine, who is a 4-star admiral. They trance out every single day, okay, and they see her or him in this uniform, and people see this and they say they're afraid to send their kids here. They're afraid to send their boys here. They're afraid their daughters here. It gets worse. What about the military families, the family members? I'm going to tell you guys, having served for 28 years in the U.S. Army, one of the greatest blessings of my life was getting to live on a military base where I got to raise my children. It was safe. It was loving. It was a nuclear family. And here's what was so cool about it. It was diverse as far as culture diverse and racially diverse. You had Hispanic and African American and white families all merged in these housing units. They were together, and you know what the bond was? The bond was serving a cause greater than their own, but you also had this incredible Christian bond amongst all the families. You had and you saw this amongst the wives and amongst the children on the military bases. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. This is what attracted a lot of people to the military, was that structure and that safe environment to go and serve our country. It was safe. It was loving. It was a nuclear family, and it was the centerpiece of all. But today, I'm going to tell you something, guys. That is eroding. Now, I talk to a lot of soldiers. I still get to talk to a lot of soldiers, and that is absolutely eroding across the part. And this is what's so sickening to me. And just look at this. Think about this. Some of the DoD policies right now are transitioning minors into gender changes on military installations and DOD schools. And I'm going to tell you, folks, you want to know why recruiting is bad? Mark Milley, I'm just going to tell you right now. You keep doing this, and you're not going to have anybody. You're not going to have anybody. This is having long lasting impacts on recruiting. Case in point, a shocking video went viral about on Twitter. It's been about 2 weeks ago, where a U.S. Navy official in Bahrain told a group of sailors about the Navy's policy to talk to children as young as 12. Okay, let this sink in. 12. Okay, this was the Navy's policy about gender identity without parental notification. Now, the video was posted by a social media influencer by the name of Robbie Starbuck, and at the time, and it's probably got up to 5 or 6 million views now. It had 4.4 million views. Okay, I want the Army, or I want the military recruiting command to let that sink in. Okay, so you have a social media platform where it gets 4 million views in about a day, and it's a Navy official giving a horrible example to a young Navy sailor when he had some legitimate questions he was asking about this gender transition policy for 12-year-olds. And this was recorded in Bahrain, and I want you to watch this video. Watch this.
You're the minor child, someone who can't consent to anything, who's not a legal adult. You're saying that minor child, they have, and the medical, quote unquote, medical professional has more rights than the parent over that child. That's the Navy's policy.
I would encourage you to talk to your child.
That's not what I asked you, ma'am. I'm asking you, according to this policy.
Again, policy. I didn't make it.
I'm not accusing you, ma'am. I'm simply calling out the Navy that the policy gives more rights or circumvents a parent's rights to know, is what you're saying. That's the Navy's official policy.
Yes.
All right.
Any other questions?
Okay, so this Navy nurse practitioner, I believe her name is Nicole Benson, seems to be saying here, okay, that parents, if you're not accepting the trans agenda, and this is why we're having so many suicides and we're having so many mental health issues with children. So you need to get on board with the gender affirming transitions. Okay. Now, here's what's happening here, folks. This is straight out of the CRT Marxist playbook right here. And DOD's using this is straight up from Karl Marx. Okay. Manipulation ploys to get parents on board with a policy that nobody wants. Yes, again, it's Budlighting. It's Budlighting the DOD parents, the sailors' parents, the Marines' parents, the Army parents, okay, of their children. Gender transition, and you're going to hear this. You saw this when the sailor respectfully asked the Navy official, "What is the Navy's policy to circumvent the right? Is the Navy's policy to circumvent the rights of parents?" You saw that, and what did she say? Yes. She said it, yes. Circumventing the parental rights of our service members. And you wonder why minor children, this is beyond belief, and you wonder why why your recruiting is collapsing. You can't make this up. Should not come as a surprise. There's a lot of people that had started writing about this, and you see that picture here of an article that was written almost a year and a half ago by a lady named Amy Haywood when she said, "Why are our Department of Defense schools transitioning students' gender behind the parents' backs?" Now, she reported this in the Daily Signal in 2021, and she asked that question: why are gender transitioning students behind parents' backs? Now, we'll just tell you guys, there's parental outrage with this, even in the secular and the civilian world. Okay, but using all the progressive curriculums at DOD schools, you're seeing this comprehensive sex education to include the gender identity and these programs that are not only sweeping across the country in the very liberal parts of the country, they're also sweeping across military bases. Parents have a good reason to be up in arms. The Department of Defense schools, according to them, are helping children change their names and pronouns at the school behind the parents' back. This is what Haywood writes. Haywood says in the article, Haywood points out this is a clear violation. She quotes this very well of the Constitution. She would later say that parents have the right to oversee the care and education and control of their children as guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. This was affirmed by the Supreme Court in 1923 in Meyer versus Nebraska, and as recently in 2000 in a case called Troxville and Granville. She reports this. Regardless of the constitutional violations, the problem for the U.S. military is this is on a collision course with the military's base of recruits where they get. And this base of recruits, since we've had the all-volunteer Army since the 70s, has been winning wars for us for a long time, okay? And recently, the Pentagon, okay, and you hear this from Milley, and you hear this from Austin, have argued that the recruiting roles that we have is due primarily to the strong job market. I'm going to tell you guys, that is a bunch of bull. That is just tomfoolery and malarkey. I mean, it's just a bunch of bull. And here's the thing. And Mark Milley's going to keep making that argument, but it's stupid and it's not holding any water. And if you believe Mark Milley on that, just like you believed his strategic disaster that he had in Afghanistan, I have some oceanfront property I'm going to sell you in Arizona. Now, as far as General Austin, I want to tell you guys, I am extremely, extremely disappointed in him. I served with him on a very short time in 2003 in Iraq. Had a lot of respect for him. He was a one-star general. He was I want to say he was the assistant division commander for 3rd Infantry Division. Led their attack into Baghdad when we were doing our relief in place when I was in the 1st Armored Division with him. I got to speak to him for a few minutes and during a briefing one time and had to brief him on a couple of things. And I just had a tremendous amount of respect for him. But I'm going to tell you guys, I don't know how in the world he can look at himself in the mirror and overseeing the collapse of what we're seeing, the greatest military in the history of the world. And it's just really sad because at one time he was a very good soldier. But I want to go back to this question. Back to the question, can Bible-believing Christians still serve in the U.S. military? Look at this article here. This is just recently in the Army Times. Shorthanded Army to miss recruiting goal for 2nd year in a row. Guys, I want to say we were 60,000 short last year. So we're probably going to be about 70,000 short this year. Guys, I'm going to tell you, we cannot sustain that. Having served in the U.S. Army for 28 years, I'm going to tell you something, guys. That is the red alarm should be the fire alarm should be going off in every barracks across the country right now. I want to show you a survey. Back in 2017, the Barna Group had a survey of a sample of U.S. military members. Now, this is about the same time you still had about 70% approval rating for the U.S. military. Okay. And it would be interesting to see the data, the empirical data today, but now this is what it said in the Barna Group survey in 2017. I'm going to read this here. Biblical ideals, either very 26% or somewhat 46%, represent their belief. Okay. Bible believing. This is the military. This is a survey sample of the entire military, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard. Okay. Folks, that's 72% back in 2017. And what you're seeing, and you saw this, okay? Now, I want you to fast forward for 6 years. And what has happened in the Biden administration with their woke DOD policies, from abortion on demand to taxpayer funding abortion, which is against the Hyde Amendment, okay? From promoting drag queens on military bases, it's happening. It's happened at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. It's happening in military bases overseas. You just saw one on a Navy ship, okay? where you had these drag queen shows on ships, okay, and you're seeing the lowering the fitness standards, okay, so you could have so we can have the gender integration, and I was always for gender integration as long as the standards did not change, but they just threw that out the window, okay. And you're having these gender identity policies for military minors of children, and this is wrecking havoc, and this is on a collision course. Remember what I said, 72% of the military in 2017 thought this book really mattered, and this is on a collision course with that culture. Now, why is this important? Why is this important? Recruiting for all services is at a low point. Now, it's not just it's not just the Army, it's the Navy, it's the Air Force, it's the Marines, it's everybody. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. As a 28-year Army veteran, this old colonel is I'm just heartbroken by this. This is the country and the Army that I've just loved and I've served for so long. It's a sad state of affair for our armed forces, but as a disciple of Jesus, the question, can our values, are they still welcome? Are they still welcome? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. The question's relevant because it will drastically affect our future military. And I'm going to tell you guys, the timing on this couldn't have been worse. It started really with the strategic disaster withdrawal from Afghanistan. A lot of people, a lot of red flags were raised at the Biden administration. And then you saw the recent Pentagon leaks about the things that are happening in Russia, and actually where you're seeing Russia had a lot of success in Ukraine that was not previously briefed. And you see those leaks that came out in the Pentagon. You're also seeing China just pretty much do whatever they want to. They've got their sights set on Taiwan now. This is another podcast. China's not as strong as we make them out to be many times, guys. If you've studied China like I have for a long time, China's in a lot of hurt right now. But here's the problem: the Biden administration has made China a lot stronger than they actually are, but they've got their sights set on Taiwan, and that's a whole nother podcast, and we'll talk about that later. You also see Iran's proxy war with Israel. And like I told you before, since Biden has taken office, you've had about 73 attacks against U.S. interest and soldiers and contractors. In fact, I think a contractor was killed about 2 weeks ago. And we have responded 4 times. And that's not Scott Patton's. You can look at that. That's the Secretary of Defense testimony. Okay. Guys, I'm just going to tell you, we desperately need a strong all-volunteer force from all parts of the country. And it doesn't take the brains of an archbishop or the genius of Karl Clausewitz to figure this out, that the woke policies of the Biden administration has drastically affected the recruiting. And I don't know if we could ever get it back. I'm going to show you a graph here. And if you see this on the screen, this is a lot of people in the military have known about this for a long time. I want you to look at this graph. And I want you to see, this was in 2007. And it gave a proportion of the states where you primarily got recruits from, okay? So the reddest of red states are according to this, from a ratio from 2007, okay? You're seeing where most of the recruits are coming from. Now, the real reason that the recruiting is collapsing is a lot of it is geography. There's 2 reasons: geography and Christianity, and they go hand in hand. Because you're seeing states like the red states, like Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri. You don't see as many in back in 2007 in Louisiana or Mississippi, but Alabama and Florida. These are this is the Bible Belt, and this is where you have a gigantic presence of evangelical Christians, whether they're black or white. And that demographic has served for a number of years. And this is where you saw it back in the Iraq War. And this chart was taken in 2007. So this was at the height of the surge in the Iraq War in 2007. And this tradition explains where we get our recruits from. And we have been since really the inception. I wrote a paper on this back when I was in the Army War College back in 2010, and so I still in the my dissertation or my master's thesis was on where we get who fights for America, where we get our recruits. Now, since the inception of the all-volunteer military, I want you guys to understand that the military has often been self-selecting, and what happens is most of the military bases and posts resides in just like that map that you see there in Texas and Oklahoma and Georgia and Kentucky and North Carolina and Kansas and Alabama and Florida. And so you have these military bases that have already existed in these places. You have a large presence of evangelical Christians, okay? And these locations of these military bases, I mean, and plus the influence of the Bible Belt has drastically influenced the assumptions, values, and the beliefs of these states that are most proximate to the military facilities. Now, as you see in 2007, this was guys, this was a hard time. This was when a bunch of soldiers were dying in Iraq. Okay, and I remember this time, and I was a battalion commander at this time, and we were, man, I'll tell you what, we were doing everything we could to get as many soldiers and we could in the Army, because we at that time we were putting every available body in Iraq. And what was happening was the same 200,000 soldiers, which at the time was about 0.02% of the population, kept going back for these redeployments. They're all coming from those states that you see in that graph. A DoD study in 2009 said this: a statistical analysis of the population of the all-volunteer military from 1973 to 2009 indicates that most of the recruits inside the United States come from these red states. You can like it or not. And for years, I'm going to tell you guys, the Democrat Party despises this fact. But many times it was conveniently overlooked because you didn't have to have a lot of the blue states wouldn't send anybody. But you still wanted, and here's what I'm saying. A lot of people, didn't like, at one time. Now that it's kind of reversed itself. You had the liberals of the Democratic Party didn't want were very anti-war, and now it's kind of reversed. But because here's the thing. The large all-volunteer force kept this economic engine of the United States going, and that's what it boiled down to. And I want you guys to understand that. It's never been about freedom and democracy from a U.S. foreign policy standpoint. It's always been about economic security, period. Okay? But, again, that's another podcast for another day, but here's what I want you to understand. When you see that map, it's often overlooked because the populations that served in the military and we continue to serve and fight the wars were and especially the southern region of the United States, historically played a disproportionate role to the U.S. military accessions. And you see there as the South and the Southwest and the upper western region, like in Montana and Idaho and places like that in Nevada, those two regions traditionally accounted for 67% of all military recruits. Now, this was back and this was the survey from 1975 to 2009 when I wrote this paper at the War College. Likewise, the preference to serve in the military across the country was most pronounced in the rural areas, the small towns. An inclination to serve in these communities was way beyond the share of the population. Now, this is where when you say, well, why do you call it Budlighting? Well, it's on a side note. Before Bud Light sponsorship of Dylan Mulvaney, okay, you could bet that these communities were diehard Bud Light drinkers. I'm just saying they were, okay? But it wasn't always about politics and geography, okay? Since the inception, now I want you to look at that picture there. And you have white, you have African American, and you have Hispanic soldiers or football players on a football team. They're praying. Same thing. Beautiful picture there with the flag, and you had African American soldiers, you have female soldiers, you have white soldiers, Hispanic soldiers, all praying together as brothers and sisters in Christ that we're fighting for America. Now, I'm just going to tell you guys, since the inception of the U.S. military, Christianity has always played a vital role, especially in the all-volunteer force. But for the past 50 years, the military recruits have increasingly volunteered from a segment of society with a very strong culture affiliations, okay, with biblical values and the military lifestyle. It has. It has been for a long time. The biblical values were not limited to white males. Instead, they included a large swath of African American soldiers and sailors and Marines, a large percent of the Hispanic community, and all these demographics here. I'm just going to tell you, they focused on the nuclear families. They were Bible believing. These recruits, whether they're white, black, or Hispanic. Okay, now here's what I want you to think about. In 2007, a sociologist named Michael Lindsay, he wrote in the Journal of Political and Military Sociology. And he came across this, and a lot of people saw this, and many politicians at the time thought this was a problem, but it wasn't a problem because nobody cared, because this is how you maintain the all-volunteer force. Evangelicals became prominent players in the U.S. military. And what happened was, when you see all this in those states that I showed you on that graph, recruiters sold a lifestyle that stressed respect for authority, for discipline, for family values, and a commitment to a higher cause. Here I am, send me. Amazingly, the Army has recently recognized this dynamic, and I think they're starting to see this. I think they always knew it, and they're trying to bring back the Be All You Can Be commercial that Mad Max Thurman used so well back in the early 80s. And that's the one that I enlisted under when I was a young private. Be All You Can Be, that commercial that was so popular back then. And the Army's trying to try to capture that. But I think they're going to have a very hard time because of the things I just outlined. The Army had now realized you just can't throw that segment of society in America and just throw it away. Because that segment of society, whether the Marxists and the liberals like it or not, have kept America safe and has kept our economic interest safe for a very long time. The question is it too late? Can we fix it? Only time will tell. Achingly similar to Bud Light's disastrous force feed of trans ideologies on their base. I think the Biden administration and the Department of Defense needs to remember who its most essential customers are. The purpose of the military is to fight and win wars, period. But you're going to see some similarities between what Bud Light did at a micro level is happening at a macro level in the U.S. military. Because the same lower middle class recruits from these small towns across America, where you have Dollar General stores, and the Dollar General stores are on every corner. They reign with rodeos and Friday night lights and kegs of Bud Light in every bar, used to be, in a Baptist church on every corner. Where you had Fellowship of Christian Athletes meetings where white, black, Hispanic athletes would meet and they'd pray together. These are the kids that coaches would send off to the Army, would make good friends with the recruiters. This is where the preachers would have the recruiters in their Rolodex, okay? And whether the Biden administration likes it or not, this segment of society, okay, that is so despised by many in the administration, kept our military the best in the world. And without them, we will not have a military capable of defending the economic interests of America. And like Bud Light, I'm not optimistic that this is going to end well. And sadly, the stakes will not be the collapse of a great beer company, but rather the destruction of the greatest military in the history of the universe. And I'm going to ask you guys, pray for our country, pray for our military. We desperately need an intervention from God. We desperately need God's guidance, God's hands. And I think probably in the end right now, a lot of senior leaders in the military recognize this, but they can't do anything about it. And so we've got to pray for them. And even though I vehemently disagree with Secretary of Defense Austin, he just really disappointed me. And Mark Milley's always been about him, so it's never, he's a whole different animal. But I'm just going to tell you, we still need to pray for them. We need to pray for our military, and we need to pray for our country. God bless you, friends, and go bold.